I make reference to the fact that 3 of my progenitors came over on the Mayflower so that they could worship the way they wanted to. The next step in my life, in my history, is my great-great-grandfather, John Tanner, joined the church in New York State in 1832. I'll tell you the experience if you wish to hear it. He had heard that 2 missionaries were coming out to his town to hold a meeting. Remember, this is just 2 years after the church was organized. He was a very influential man in the community, community-minded, and a religious man. And when he heard that these 2 elders were going to hold a meeting in the schoolhouse, he determined that he would go there and see that they preached no false doctrine. Though he had been in a wheelchair for months and couldn't walk, he had his sons take him over, wheel him right up to the front of the pulpit so he could challenge them, question them. When they'd finished, he said to his boy, "I wish you'd go out and bring those young men down for me to meet them." And they did. And he asked them if they'd like to come to his home and stay that night. And they accepted, naturally, traveling without purse or script. And as they went home, they discussed the gospel until the early hours of the morning. And then John Tanner said, "You know, if I were well enough, I think I'd like to be baptized." So one of the elders said, "Do you think the Lord could heal you?" He thought about it and said, "Well, if the Lord wanted to, he could." So they administered to him, blessed him that he'd be well. This was in the early hours of the morning. That very day, he left his wheelchair, never to return to it. And he walked nearly 3/4 of a mile to be baptized. Now, I've always been so thankful that he, knowing that this would make them ridicule him, and his influence in the community would be greatly lessened, to think that when he heard the truth, he accepted it. And I've been so thankful that he remained true to the church, and his son, Nathan, remained true to the church, and his son, William, and his son, Nathan, who is my father, remained true to the church. And I've said so many times, that's the reason I'm here, because they accepted and lived the gospel.
Of humble beginnings might be the best way to describe the early life of President Nathan Eldon Tanner. Diligent parents set an uncompromising example for the future counselor to 4 presidents of the church. Nathan Tanner's parents were living in Alberta, Canada, but his mother returned to Salt Lake City for his birth. She returned to Alberta when Nathan was 3 weeks old.
Teaching him at home was very important to me. Father was a very religious man, and Dad and I were really friends together. I considered him as my best friend, and I knew he loved me. And Mother was the queen of the home. I always knew I could depend on my father doing the right thing. I knew he wouldn't cheat anybody. I know he'd be honest and honorable, upright in his dealings. That was an example to me. He used to spend what time he could with his family. During the summer, we usually take a day or 2 and go up to Waterton Lakes and do a little fishing. And as hunting was open, we'd go out with Dad. And my friends were jealous of me. Many of them said, "Boy, if we just had a dad like yours." There are 2 things about prayer that I learned in our home. My father just talked to the Lord. There's no repetition of what he said yesterday or the day before, but just talked to the Lord and presented our problems and asked for guidance. And it helped us to really understand that God was a living God. We'd been taught that. And in the prayer, I remember one time talking about doing the things I should. One evening, he said to the Lord in prayer, he said, "Eldon did something today he shouldn't have done. He feels sorry about it. If you'll forgive him, he won't do it again." Well, it meant a great deal more than a strapping or something of the kind. I never spent a full year in school after I was able to help on the farm. Well, then, after graduated from grade 8, or grade 9, I decided to go to Cardston to go to school, which is 7 miles north of Etna, where we then lived. And my brother was going to go to high school as well, or the school, same town, I thought. he decided to go to Raymond, where the night academy was. So Father called me the day I had registered it, encouraged and said, I wish you'd go down to Raymond. Your brother needs you there. So I made that change. After finished my school in Raymond, I wanted to go to normal school in Calgary. Father said, well, we need you on the farm. He said, if you can arrange the money, we can't finance it, but if you can arrange to borrow the money, we'll sacrifice your help on the farm. So I went to the bank. I was frightened to death. I never talked to a banker before, and here I was talking to the manager of the bank and told him what I wanted. And he said, are you Carl Tanner's boy? And I said, no, I'm N.W. Tanner's boy. He said, well, when could you pay this loan back? I said, I'll start as soon as I start teaching school. So he let me have the money that I needed. That was a very, very significant thing in my life, when he knew that I was N.W. Tanner's son. And I made up my mind right then that I'd try to live so that I would have that kind of name when my children came along. But while I was in Cardston, standing in the one corner of one of those big classrooms, I was standing there with a couple of other fellows, and I saw 2 or 3 girls standing up in the far corner. And I said to one of the fellows, who's that beautiful black-eyed girl up there? And they said, well, that's Sally Merrill from Hill Spring. I didn't know where Hill Spring was. But I said to them, you know, someday I'm going to marry that girl. Well, I left. I didn't meet her then at all. And I didn't see her again until June of the next year. I was clerking in a grocery store that owned by my uncle during the summer. And I remember her so well. She came in to buy some things at the store, and I was the one who took her order. And I remember that so well. That's the first time I had met her. I didn't meet her. I just served her as a clerk. It's the only customer I remember in that whole summer that came in particularly. And she was kind enough to say, I was conscious of you. And I should tell you, too, that when I said that about her, she had seen me down in the corner of this other room. She said, who's that homely kid down there? Well, she was talking to an aunt of mine who was just a year older. She told her who I was, but that's the contrast. It's a tremendous thing for a man to have a wife that will support him in all things and help him do better, and to let the family know the importance of the church and the good living. She's always conscious of my comfort or discomfort, and a great strength to me, has been ever since we were married. I love her and appreciate her and thank the Lord for her. I don't think I ever pray but what I thank the Lord for my wife, and pray that, and for the love we have for each other, pray that we may continue to carry on that way.
I feel that I have always wanted to support my husband. I made up my mind early in my marriage that I would never stand in his way in this church work in any way. I would do all I could to support him. I really felt that I always had a testimony of the gospel, but it certainly has been a great influence in raising my daughters. All of my girls are very active in the church. They have good families that are also active.
He served as president of Merrill Petroleum, and later directed the construction of a 2,200-mile trans-Canadian pipeline. A challenging career in politics as Speaker of the House in Alberta, and later as Minister of Lands, Mines and Forests, did not prevent President Tanner from serving widely in church callings, from ward teacher to stake president of the Calgary, Alberta stake. One day in 1960, President David O. McKay asked to speak with him. This is a day that President Tanner will never forget.
I was down here attending a conference. I was a stake president up in Canada when President McKay sent word that he'd like to see me the next morning. Of course, I didn't know what he wanted to see me for, but he sat in front of me, he sat me down in front of him, and he placed his hand on my knee and he said, President Tanner, the Lord wants you to come and be one of the general authorities, an assistant to the 12. Asked me how I felt about it. I don't know what I said, but I said I felt very inadequate, but would do my best to serve if called.
2 years later, in 1962, President Tanner was called as a member of the Council of the 12. The following year, he became second counselor to President McKay. and later in 1970 to President Joseph Fielding Smith. In 1972, Elder Tanner was made first counselor to President Harold B. Lee, and in 1973 was called as first counselor to President Spencer W. Kimball.
President McKay called when I was presiding over the West European Mission and asked me to go down to Nigeria and look over the situation because there were groups there that were calling themselves the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And they had sent here for literature. They had the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, Jesus the Christ, and Marvelous Work and a Wonder. And then they had also received some of the magazines at that time. And I'll just tell you one experience I had down there, which I think is very significant. We had attended the 3 of the 4 services in 3 of the 4 groups. And the leader of the largest group was not there, but he came back before we left. And I went down to interview him and talk about his experience, his organization, and so on. And I said, how many members do you have in your organization? And he said, 4,000. I said, I don't mean how many people live in the community. How many members in your church? He straightened up a little more and he said, 4,000 baptized members. And I said, well, you know, you can't baptize people in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints unless someone holding the priesthood. And he said, I know that. But he said, I know we can when President McKay tells us. And if we can't hold it here on this life, we want to be prepared for it when we're in the next world because we know we'll get the priesthood. Now, coming to the revelation regarding the blacks holding the priesthood, naturally, we had discussed this several times with different presidents of the church. But President Kimball felt a strong urge that these men probably should hold the priesthood, and he wanted to be sure he was doing his part. He spent days in the temple alone, praying, and he said, shedding tears, pleading with the Lord to know what to do. And he came to the first presidency meeting one morning, and he said, I have my answer. And discussed it with us, and we decided to take it to the 12 immediately. And then we called the members who were not present of the 12, wherever they were, told them about it and asked them how they felt about it. And they thought they were very happy about it. Now, what I remember about President McKay particularly, well, he had a stroke, you know, and I was with him there for a while after that. And when he wasn't able to go out into the conferences or mingle with the people, he said to me, wherever you go, President Tanner, I would like you to remind those people, members of the church, who they are, that they have an individual responsibility. And that was my message wherever I went. When President McKay died and President Joseph Fielding Smith became president of the church, he said that our responsibility was to prepare the people, our people, members of the church, for the second coming of Christ, and to help others understand it and prepare themselves for it. Now, that's a great message. When President Lee was being interviewed in a press conference, one of them said, President Lee, what is your message now to your people or to the world? He said 2 words, keep the commandments. And that again is a tremendous message if you just realize what it means. Well, then when President Kimball became president of the church, he emphasized how important it was that we take the message of the gospel to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. And we needed to work harder and be more dedicated to it. And he used the expression, lengthen your stride, which has been accepted all over the church. They're all very fine living, good living, fine characters, but they were very different in personality. And to sit with 4 of those presidents of the church at their feet and counsel with them day after day over 15 or 16 years, there's no question in your mind, you can't be a question in your mind, but what each is a prophet of God, and that the Lord works through them in advancing the work here in the church, in the world. I was at a news conference in Madison, Wisconsin, at the time of our area conference there last weekend. And one of the men said to me, how do you account for your church growing and rapidly as it is, where others, many of them are on a plateau and others are actually losing members? I said, if you won't be offended, I'll tell you, this is the Church of Jesus Christ. And as such, it should go forward throughout all the world. We have, when I came here, we had about 12,000 missionaries. When President Kimball made president of the church, we had about 18,000. Today we have 28,000 missionaries spread throughout the world, teaching the gospel, and members in over 80 countries of the world. Well, when the church had grown to a certain point, they appointed assistants to the 12. Then as it grew farther, and we saw the need of having the first quorum of 70 organized, it was organized, and the assistants to the 12 all became members of the first quorum of 70. Now, it's been a great experience to see the growth, and these brethren go out into the world as executive administrators and on the ecclesiastical side. President Romney said to me today, he said, you know, Satan is real. And I said, I certainly do, and I think many of our young people find him to be a real force to deal with. And I feel really that the church is stronger than it's ever been. It has leaders down through the ranks where the church has been established, and the world is paying attention to our church today. Men of high standing in different places are being brought into the church. And I feel truly that we will move forward and have a greater influence on the world than we've ever had before, in spite of the fact that we'll be losing some members because of the lack of training or testimony, or they've made a mistake and they think they're lost anyway. But my feeling is that the trend is getting to be more and more along a righteous line. I believe that the youth today are stronger than they ever were. There are more going astray because there are many more members of the youth in the church. And they have great temptations. But I feel confident that with the teachings of the church and the example of the leaders and the experience they have will help them to live the way they should. And the church will be strong. And the missionary work, when you think there are 28,000 missionaries out in the field, when they come back, if they've done their work the way they should, what a great strength it gives to the church. And it brings new people in. And as that program goes on, the people are stronger and more prepared to meet the evils of the day. Well, my message to the young people is this. We're here for one purpose, that they're spirit children of God. They belong to the Church of Jesus Christ. And the devil is after them. There's no question about it. And it's so important that they keep themselves clean and pure. And if they will, we know that they'll be happier, they'll be more successful, they'll be loved and respected, and be working out their salvation and exaltation. And I bear witness that I know that God lives, that we are his spirit children, and that he's interested in us. And I know also that Jesus Christ and God the Father appeared to Joseph Smith and gave him the message which made it possible to prepare him to organize the church under their direction. And I know, too, that Jesus Christ is the cornerstone of this church. It's his church. He's interested in us. He's directing the activities of the church, the messages to the church through a prophet of God. And there's no question in my mind, in fact, my testimony is stronger than ever has been before, that these things are true, and that the gospel just offers us a better way of life, and how much happier we'll be if we'll accept it and live according to it all the time.